Welcome to today's Technology Spotlight series. My name is Jamie. I am a marketing campaign manager at DLT Solutions. We are excited to showcase Red Hat's technology offerings and services to our public sector customers through this monthly Technology Spotlight series. Prior to getting started, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items. First, please mute your phones at all times. If you have any questions during the presentation, please place these questions in the chat box on the right and we will address them during our Q&A. Please do not put us on hold if you are not on mute, as we will hear the background music. This Technology Spotlight series will be recorded for future on-demand viewing within DLT Marketplace portals. I'd like to introduce our speakers, Mark, Senior Solutions Architect, and Russ, Senior Solutions Architect at Red Hat, who will be discussing today's topic, Enterprise Open Source, Why Linux?
All right, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. So again, my name is Mark Anderson. Thanks for taking a few minutes out of your day to spend with us. Along with me is Russell Pavelicek. We're both Senior Solutions Architects here with Red Hat in the North American public sector. And so today what we're going to talk about is, as mentioned, enterprise open source and why Linux. Really, I think the why Linux, why RHEL is maybe what you can replace that with or maybe think about. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to, hopefully keep this lighthearted, very conversational. Again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Please feel free to use that. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll do our best to get to them maybe either as we go along or certainly at the end. Okay, so with that, let's start with just a couple facts and figures. All right, I'm driving 2 slides here. Hold on. Okay, great. Thank you. So, first of all, let's take a look at this one. So 95% of IT leaders say enterprise open source is important to their organization's strategy. So where do we get that from? So this is from a survey that we conducted. It's called the State of Enterprise Open Source. So we did that survey this year. And we conducted this survey based upon reaching out to, it says here, 1,250 total interviews were conducted. And that spanned across the world. So 400 companies from the United States, 450 from Europe and the Middle East. Companies are, from English speaking in Asia Pacific, so APAC, and then 250 from LATAM. So that's a good and wide breadth of companies to take a look at. And they're all saying, that's pretty definitive there. Enterprise open source is important to their organization strategy. And the one thing that we want to key on here is that word enterprise. And I'm going to keep on referring back to that as we go through today's presentation. So as we move forward in here, now 89% of those IT leaders use enterprise open source. So, it's very important and they're also using it, right? But then their next slide here is, what does that really mean? What is enterprise open source comprised of? So let's take a minute and just kind of associate ourselves with what that means when we talk about enterprise. So we've got a few things here on this first slide here. So this first one, we talk about that it's tested and hardened for enterprise use. So, what does that mean to us? So, anybody can download and install an open source project or compile it, or, ship it as is from an upstream repository. It doesn't really add any value to the project though, and that carries risk. So to be what we call enterprise open source, a product requires testing, performance tuning. It's got to be examined for security flaws. It needs to have a security team that stands behind it and processes for responding to new security vulnerabilities and notifying users about these security issues. And most importantly, how do you remediate them, right? So if you're on your own when it comes to these types of things, these types of concerns, right? If you're the one waking up at 3 a.m. and having to address these things, if you're the one fretting on an implementation of a new release, that what's going to happen within your enterprise, right? That's not enterprise open source. So the next thing here, this predictable and long life cycle that we're talking about. These, again, enterprise IT environments, they require a lot of investment and planning, right? What's coming down the pipe? What can be expected? When's it going to drop? And if you don't know when these things are going to drop, that certainly causes a lot of havoc in the environment. So, people who by and large, do not like having to suddenly relearn how to use a system or having an application go sideways, right? Downtime. because an update renders it, or maybe part of its underlying components unusable. That's something we need to think about. Like, yeah, you know what? Maybe I need some support, right? Because we need to think about most of the applications that we depend upon for work they're a complex stack that rests on certainly robust hardware, a stable operating system, one or more programming languages, handfuls of binaries or libraries that are out there, right? We've got databases, we've got in-house code, configurations, user data. So, as an example, from the world that I came from, I spent a lot of time in app dev, probably 27 years doing that. When you're taking on that responsibility, when new updates are coming in, or I've got a new package or something that I want to add to the mix, maybe a new feature or capability, when you're taking on all of the testing, all the things that have to happen inside of that, that's a heavy lift, and it's also very stressful, right? The next thing in here we talk about is certification. So it's along with that life cycle, right? That aligns with these enterprise requirements. Enterprise open source is also characterized by certifications, right? So you want to pick hardware that works with the operating system and applications that you're deploying. That's why we work with a number of hardware partners to certify RHEL on those platforms and enable features like something like GPU pass-through for Red Hat OpenShift or for OpenStack, right? And for products like Red Hat Enterprise Linux and OpenStack, you can choose these platforms to run workloads that are important to your business, including those offered by ISVs. Or maybe you're an ISV and you want to tell your customers that your products will run as expected on RHEL or on OpenStack, right? So, and part of this beauty of open source is having that choice. You've got access to source code, combined projects, any way you see fit, as long as you can get them to work together. But greater choice and variety are frustrating to operations teams, right? That have to support systems in production, okay? So we got to make sure that, we're helping them out, helping them to know what's running in their environment and when security vulnerabilities might affect them. So moving on to our next one here, a couple more things we need to talk about when we talk about enterprise open source. Certainly an SLA. So when something goes down, when something happens, who are you going to be able to call? You've got to have somebody that stands behind it and supports it when something breaks, somebody you can reach out to, something that you've got an agreement in place that, hey, if this happens, I know I've got support. I know I can pick up the phone. I know I've got a company large enough to back us up that'll have somebody there that has, the breadth and experience to help me address it, right? And then also part of that, it's not only just the people, it's also, some of the backing material too as well. So we're talking about documentation, the knowledge base, articles and forums, all of which Red Hat can certainly bring to bear in these situations. Then training. Formalized training, as we mentioned here, it takes a good deal of maturity from an organization to provide these types of solutions, right? They actually have true formalized training and certifications programs. They're just not trivial to put together and maintain. So when we talk about enterprise offerings, these are some of the things that we should be looking for and considering as part of really the lifeblood of the systems that we put in place. And then also integration, right? How do we pull together, we work with so many different vendors, right? When we're pulling these pieces of software together and making them part of our service offerings that we're putting out as part of the operating system, right? Have we tested them? Are we sure that they're ready to go? That when we, turn everything on for day 2 operations, have all these integrations been tested, and are they backwards compatible? And this is not only for just day 2 operations, but we want to make sure that they continue to operate for years to come. So some more facts from this survey that we conducted. So this is really interesting, right? And I think it's true. I think maybe most people go, okay, that makes sense. 77% of IT leaders plan to increase their use of enterprise open source in the next year. So considering the things that we just talked about, right? The majority, right, are looking to increase their use of this, of enterprise software solutions. And so why do IT leaders use enterprise open source? So the first one there, if we can pause on that one for a second, we talk about higher quality software. So just in general, when we talk about engineering teams or development teams, any given company out there, how many engineers, how many developers can we actually have? If I don't know if everybody's on mute, if it's possible that everybody could go on mute, that would be great. We got a lot of background noise going on. So, all right, sorry about that, everyone. So some of the reasons IT leaders use enterprise open source software. So again, talking about higher quality software. So how do we achieve higher quality software? Well, again, as I was going to there, how many different engineers, how many different developers can a given company hire? Well, that's finite, right? It's not infinite. So what can we do there? Well, why is open source higher quality, right? It's because of the community that's out there and supporting it. These, as we say, and I think you probably have seen, shared problems are solved, better together. And if we just even look at what's happened in COVID with being able to develop the vaccine, right? That's a shared problem, shared knowledge, right? And attacking the problem and coming up with a result very quickly. Same is true is in software development. And what ends up happening there, when we talk about this, we talk about the community at large. So when people get involved and they have the ability to get involved, right? Because it's open source, what ends up happening is that they care. And when you care, you want to see things do better. And because of that, if there's issues, right, they get solved real quickly. But then the next thing on that is that also there's more innovations happening because people do have the opportunity to participate. And these are the things that we're able to contribute back to the community at large, but also then pull from and leverage and make available as part of our product offerings. Next thing, they're talking about lower the total cost of ownership. Well, absolutely, because you're receiving these benefits. We talk about ownership. There's other concerns that, maybe out there like, well, okay, how much downtime am I going to experience? And when am I going to receive updates? How is my maintenance? How am I going to take care of this myself? If I'm using enterprise open source software, right? You're receiving that subscription. You're getting those benefits along with it, right? Which are reducing your costs. And then, obviously better security. Now I want to tiptoe around this a little bit lightly because when we talk about security, especially within the federal government, there is a lot going on there. But that is top of mind for us. And we would love to come back and spend, I would say, an hour talking about that with you just on security. All right, so let's move forward to our next slides. Okay, so the next piece here, and talking about the top 3 ways that global organizations use enterprise open source. So specifically, and I'm going to try to foreshadow what we're going to get into here in just a little bit, but infrastructure modernization. And the one thing that I want to talk about there is that when we're talking about infrastructure modernization, we're not just talking about point solutions. Okay, we're talking about how do we do this, more holistically. We're thinking about the long game, if you will. And so one of the things we're going to talk about here in a minute is when I do modernization, I don't just upgrade a couple of servers. I don't just maybe buy a couple instances of RHEL and say, oh yeah, we've modernized. Or maybe I have a couple instances of automation, right? No, it's the longer game. We have to think holistically. Where are we going to? When we talk about our infrastructure, we have to think about, well, it's not only just, maybe my on-prem solution, but it's also what's happening with my cloud as well, with my cloud-based offerings that I have, or my overall application topology or infrastructure. The next thing with that, we move into app development, right? And so we need to think about application services. What's available for folks to use from an enterprise scale? So we need that trusted, solid foundation underneath that operating system to provide that baseline for us, right? But we also now need something that works on top of that works seamlessly across any cloud provider, that allows us, again, to leverage all these benefits, again, of what the operating system is providing to us and to start operating at scale. Now, this last thing here, we talk about DevOps, we want to realize this power of DevOps, but the only way to really get to that point is if we've thought this through and we haven't put, again, what I call, point solutions in place, because it's absolutely more than that. We need to have that trusted foundation of that OS in place, right? That works everywhere, works on-prem, works, anywhere within the cloud, any of the cloud providers supported, right? And then also, as what's becoming more prevalent, towards the edge. And the only way we're going to realize this value of DevOps is if we start to, utilize not only that OS, but start to pull in other things like automation solutions such as Ansible, right? And basically allow those operations teams to lift their head up, not having to keep their fingers on the keyboard all the time, repeating the same types of operations that they've already figured out and know how to solve, right? Let's write that information down. Let's check it in. Let's start talking about infrastructure as code. Start embracing some of these concepts of site reliability engineering, right? And then we can really truly achieve that, and allow those folks within those spaces to start shifting left, as we like to say, working with the folks like myself, the developers in the line of business, and really starting to bring to bear next generation solutions. So one of the things that we've been talking about internally, and Russ, I invite you to, at any point in here, just please chime in. But this was an interesting conversation that we've been starting to have within our own internal SA organization here lately. And so I pulled out this article, and I just really found this very interesting. And it's talking about, this is on Forbes, and they're saying, what comes next after digital transformation? And I found this, what do they mean by this? And the one phrase that I highlighted out of this article here is they're talking about digital transformation solves a specific point in time problem. And my view on that is that no, it's absolutely not a point solution, as I've been trying to allude to in some of our earlier conversations here. It's holistic. It's continuous, right? It's something that always needs to keep on evolving. So certainly not point in time. And as we look at a couple of other things here within this article, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get the screen to change here. So they mention here, they say, if the past year has taught us anything, is that we live in an unpredictable world with rapidly changing problems, right? Absolutely. I would say that, unfortunately, many, if not all of us, got caught a little flat-footed with what happened there, right? Not being prepared for this shift to remote work, not being prepared for all the endpoints that got stood up, right? And then in here, they do make a statement that I do agree with, that organizations that focus on individual transformations will continually find themselves falling behind. So why do I bring that up? What does that have to do with enterprise open source, and maybe specifically Linux? And I kind of tie the bow around that in saying that we don't just implement a couple instances of RHEL as an example, right? That's maybe a start to when we start to digitally transform. But this is where we need to step back and think, holistically across our enterprise, right? What's going on? How many different point solutions do I have in place? So how many different versions of operating systems am I running within my enterprise? Are the versions of my operating systems, can I run them anywhere? And I truly mean that anywhere, from the edge to devices that have a very small memory footprint, right? Very small storage. We have that. You can do that with RHEL for Edge. Will it work on any of the hyperscalers, right? Will it work on-prem? We need a solution that works across all of these different domains, because we're going to get into a little bit further here with some of the other metrics, use of hybrid cloud is where everything is going, and it's absolutely where Red Hat is certainly planting its flag.
Mark, let me chime in here.
Yep.
When we start talking about digital transformation, yeah, I get it. There's some players out there in the field that they are thinking point transformations. They are thinking about, let's go from A to B. But when we reflect on what's happened in the industry worldwide in the past 18 months, we've had to see that IT as a thing has had to rethink itself, because the paradigm that has been around for, since the beginning of, you have a computer room somewhere and you've got operators and you've got these administrators and you have so forth, and they're wandering around, they're doing things, and if something breaks, you call on a person to go. We found that absolutely fell apart in the past year and a half, because there were a lot of data centers that couldn't have people in there. There were a lot of processes that required individuals, and those individuals weren't physically there anymore. So suddenly we have to rethink what IT is and does and how it gets there. And that's truly, and this is what Mark was alluding to, this is what we think of as digital transformation at Red Hat. How do we get to the next phase, not to the next point solution, but the next phase in the way work gets done in this industry? And part of this, frankly, all rolls together. We've got what we learned with COVID in this, but also fading back for a moment to the whole notion of enterprise open source. Why is enterprise open source critical for getting this done? Because for the first time in my memory, and I have been in this industry for several decades now, I'm not going to say exactly how long, but it's been a while. We saw a worldwide shift because of the whole COVID mess. Suddenly, every organization worldwide is having to rethink the way they get the work done. Well, guess what? If you're going to do a rethink, if you're going to do a retooling, open source, the open source collaborative model, where people across the globe can pitch in their best ideas, put together their best efforts, and recombine to come up with something new, is the best route out to that next phase in digital transformation. How do we put together the post-COVID computing situation? And frankly, one of the tenets that we have at Red Hat that's been a key for us for a while, of the hybrid cloud, has proven to be an immensely valuable tool in this, because hybrid cloud, as Mark's going to elucidate on shortly, has to do with not just one platform or two platforms, but as many platforms as you need when you need them. So it's that ability to move, ability to change, ability to go from one thing to another. So open source, hybrid cloud, and digital transformation come together at a peak in what we're doing at Red Hat. Back to you, Mark.
That's awesome. Thank you for chiming in there. And what you just said, I think leads us into this. So let's kind of hammer on this a little bit. What we just went through, right? When everybody had to pivot immediately, right? Like, everybody's got to work remote. We're shutting everything down. What are we going to do? Right? So stuff was put in place. What I'm asking you all to think about right now is when we're looking at being holistic across the enterprise, okay? What was done? What happened? What just got implemented? Did we just have a couple of point solutions? We stood some stuff up. We got some band-aids on things that, you know what, probably need to go back through and take a look at and go, ooh, that wasn't done, that wasn't done so well. Here's some of the other things I would ask you to think about is before I maybe go through this list individually. At the C level, at the CIO level, all right? When we're looking at enterprise, when we're looking at what's going on in our ecosystem, okay? And that when I'm going to separate the two concerns here. When we look at our infrastructure topology and we look at our application topology, what do we have? And maybe I'm asking y'all to maybe be a little bit selfish and say, you know what, shoot for the moon. Let's talk about this again, longer term game. Where do we want to be? Where are we trying to position ourselves so that when this next thing happens, right, that we are correctly positioned? So I'm going to maybe go off here a little bit on some of my own experience, but I've had this happen, and I don't mean to be disparaging to anybody. I think it's just it's an unfortunate system of the way that things work sometimes, and that is, I would ask folks on applications that I was developing, and we would have, let's say, a centralized data store, and I would ask them and say, Have you run through the disaster recovery plan on this? Have you checked it out? Have you actually like turned the server off and see if we had failover? And did we go through these scenarios? Have you looked at what it would take you in order to do a restore? There was just never enough time to put that in place. And why was that? Because everybody was so busy fighting the daily fires that they had that they never actually took the time to say, you know what, all right, we got to stop. I know that we're all busy. Maybe we need to be a little bit, and I'll say selfish or greedy for ourselves and go, this is, we understand and we all nod our heads and go, okay, yeah, this is the right way to do business. But we never actually figured that that stormy day was truly going to come like it just did and like it is still occurring right now. I'm hoping that based upon the metrics that I've seen on, let's say, CNBC or some of the other channels, right, that it looks like maybe Delta might be letting up a little bit, but we just don't know what's going to happen. So right now we've got to sit back and go, okay, wait a minute, let's really take a look at our topologies. Let's figure out what we want to be doing, where we need to go, and for the folks that are boots on the ground, right? Let's bring this up to our managers and be like, hey, we need to go this direction. And I think now at this point, it's not going to ever happen. It did happen, and it caught us all flat-footed. So some of the questions here that we need to ask, right, is with these rapid changes that happened over the past year, were they done correctly? I know we had to shoestring some things together, right? It just has to be the case. So let's take a look back at this, right? Let's look at the changes that were done. Was this just a point solution? Was this an incremental step on our journey, towards having, a holistic approach? I know I keep using that word, but that's truly where we need to be. I need to be able to blur those lines across both the infrastructure topology and the application. And I'm going to try to get into that with you, what I mean specifically on that, all right? And again, talking about what is our long-term vision? Where do we want to be? We've touched on this digital transformation type topic. We'd like to call it digital leadership, right? Where are these next steps? I wholeheartedly believe that, digital transformation is not dead. It's not done. I'd say we're a long way away of achieving those goals, right? But I would also tell you, it doesn't necessarily ever end. As organizations, and as practitioners, we always need to be in the spaces that we're trying to look towards what's next. And the last thing that I would really want to offer up to you all here is that in getting ready for these positions, in adopting enterprise open source, what we're trying to allow folks to do is to be able to not have their fingers on keyboard all the time fighting common problems that we've probably already solved, okay? But if we can lift our heads up, we can do one of the most valuable things, and that's experiment. We can see maybe what's coming down the pipe, take a look at it, see if it's going to benefit our own internal organization or our customers. And when we can do that, we're bringing better solutions to bear for them, for ourselves. And in the aspect of those of us that are serving other customers, what are we looking to do? Meet their need, but we're hoping that they become return customers. If you can do those things, they're going to become return customers, right? Okay. So let's go on to our next slide here. So some more figures, if you will. So one of the other things that we looked at here in the next 2 years, okay, IT leaders, again, they're going to be using more enterprise open source software, more community open source software. Now, not as much as the enterprise, okay, and less proprietary. So this is escalating, which is, quite frankly, that's good. Next one here, IT, what does it say? 86% of IT leaders agree that enterprise open source is used by the most innovative companies. So let's pause on that one for a second. So some of these figures, some of these metrics, you kind of go, okay, what does that mean? So what we're saying here is that it's enterprise open source. Again, I keep on pinging on that, right? Used by the most innovative companies. Why are they the most innovative? Because they've got the time back into their days, because they're not fighting the same fires. They don't have maybe all these disparate solutions or disparate point solutions, or even amongst internal teams, right? Where we might have one organization that does it one way and another organization within the same, umbrella, company they're doing things different ways. We want to try to, stop folks from doing that. Let's have, again, that holistic solution that works across the board. And when we're able to achieve that, when we're able to start moving in that direction, what happens is exactly what I was just talking about a minute ago. This ability to experiment, this ability to try things out, to innovate, to get ahead of the curve. So instead of trying to keep up, right, we're actually setting the pace. All right. And this next one, I think, supports that as well. Let me move on to it here internally. 83% of IT leaders say enterprise open source is instrumental in their organization's abilities to take advantage of cloud architectures. Well, absolutely. And when we say taking advantage of these cloud architectures, so again, hopefully we're going to jump into this in just a second. We're talking about what types of platforms are we putting in place when we're taking advantage of these cloud architectures. So it's twofold. Again, it's part of that infrastructure, right? And then it's how can I lay down my applications so that they can hop between, any one of these clouds that I set up, right? When I lay down an open source architecture, an enterprise open source architecture, right? This is allowing me again to work seamlessly, and I can make different choices and about where I put my compute. Maybe I've got a different need that has to happen, or a change, let's say at a program level, or I discover that there's an opportunity for us to move some compute maybe further out to the edge, or maybe just around wherever it might need to go. Maybe it needs to come back on-prem. To take full advantage of these cloud architectures, we need to blur those lines, and we do that by enabling something like RHEL to sit there as our trusted foundation. All right, catch up here with y'all. So hybrid cloud use. So this is where we're going to take a second and talk about what hybrid cloud really means. So a couple of the numbers here, we'll just take a look at this real quick. 63% have a hybrid cloud infrastructure today. And of those who don't, more than half of them plan to implement a hybrid cloud infrastructure in the next 2 years. So let's pause on that for a second. So what does that really mean? We talk about hybrid cloud. And when we talk about that, we need to differentiate between multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. So multi-cloud within an organization, that means that I might have some stuff on-prem, and I might have some stuff in maybe one of the hyperscalers. I might have some of our architecture within one of the hyperscalers, right? But when we start to talk about hybrid cloud, to me, that means that across both of them, let's say 2 or more, so maybe on-prem, maybe on one of the hyperscalers, maybe on multiple of the hyperscalers. The way that my enterprise works is flowing through all of those. This is especially true when we start to talk about application-centric type ideas. So how my application is architected, the different types of things that we start to utilize. So I want to start to I guess, lay some groundwork here for what we're going to talk about coming up in just a minute. Where are my applications? We're not talking about when we implement a hybrid cloud, when we start to look at cloud native application development or container driven approaches. At no point are we ever talking about throw away everything that you have to go totally new greenfield. That's not the case. We need to be talking about different types of messaging architectures and things that we will have in place in order to enable that. So again, I need that seamless, trusted foundation to be sitting there, and then I'm going to start to overlay these other types of platforms on top of it. So such as automation, such as OpenShift, such as application services, right? And so when we talk about hybrid, that's to me what's really important. I want to start to blur those lines, and where my application might sit, it really shouldn't matter. We need to be talking about really the concept of endpoints more than just applications, being considered monoliths, as they have been for quite some time. Okay, so getting into the open hybrid cloud. So this is we call our 3 pillars. And so we start to talk about the hybrid cloud infrastructure, right? Management and automation, and cloud native development. When I think about these things, I think it's a little bit more consumable for me when I look at it this way. So I like to overlay RHEL. When I start talking about hybrid cloud infrastructure, that's where, for me, I want to think about RHEL. So again, talking about that definition that we just shared about hybrid cloud, what does that mean? Well, I want to blur those lines, and I want to now, from an architectural standpoint, I want to make decisions as needed. I want to leverage different components that may exist in different clusters, in different hyperscalers, right? I'd like to weave my architecture together, perform reuse, scalability. This is where we start to lean on stuff like OpenShift, right? On all of that, not only from the server perspective, but all the networking components, both hardware and software defined, right? I've got containers out there that have applications running within them, or services, right? Microservices. I've got to maintain them. I've got to make sure that they're updated, that that they are secure, as an example, right? And how do I care and feed for that ecosystem? Well, that's where Ansible comes into play. The three of these together really are, the bread and butter, if you will. I think there's a fourth that needs to be on there, and again, that's application services. But this is really the main three that we try to talk about. Now, we've set this stage about talking about some of these application architectures, and one of the things that we've started to I guess see become more prevalent, right, is looking at, so let's look at this. This was something again from Gartner, and this is an emerging technologies trends impact radar. And I found this really compelling, and I wanted to share it with you all today. So there's a few things in here that I think are of note, and just to kind of get us all on the same page as to how we read through this. If you look at the yellow, they're talking about that being now, and then so now from 0 to 1 year away, all right? So level of importance, the range of when this is going to come into impact. And then you can also see those dots, and hopefully it makes sense. So that really dark blue is, very high impact. I've got a lot of weight associated with it, backwards up to low. All right, so with that said, we start looking at productivity revolution down there on that bottom right, and what's in the center. And we see things like edge AI and, again, cloud AI and developing deep neural networks, right? So a lot of emphasis on AI and leveraging that to enhance productivity, right? To gain knowledge from aggregating this data, figuring out what's going on, looking at the patterns within it, performing, predictive analytics based upon that. And just, what does that mean? What's going to have to happen for in order for that to occur? Well, that first one, that edge AI, and it's got a very high weight, right? And it's coming now to within a year. How do we enable that? So again, hammering on that point of, RHEL for edge. Where are we going to put that compute? Where does it belong? To be able to make those types of decisions as far as how I architect my applications, where does it belong? And allowing that to just happen. It's not that it's just a snap of a finger, but I'm hopefully taking out many of the concerns, right? What OS is it going to exist on? Am I going to be able to put it on one of those small devices? Well, the answer is yes, we have that in place. Some of the other things, when we go up into the business enablers, and that's in the top, one of the things that I see there is this low code application platform. And you'd be like, what does that really mean? Well, what we're going to pivot into here now in the next little part of our discussion has to do with, if you see up there, there's something that's starting to make a little bit larger noise, okay? And it's something that Gartner calls these packaged business capabilities, or PBCs, okay? So in conjunction with low-code applications in these packaged business capabilities, what they're really talking about are API-driven architectures. So one of the things that I want to kind of plant in your mind is that, and there are some surveys that we have that we'd love to share with you, and I think they're also provided by Gartner and us, is that what is happening with the way that applications are going to be developed and the way that services are going to be consumed, and then but also expected to be delivered. So what's happening there is, normally, if you receive an application, right, you might say, well, okay, then I would expect to have some sort of an interface, some sort of a GUI. In this case, it's going to be twofold to me. You're going to be expected to probably have some way, excuse me, to interface with it. But also, we're talking about, it being API driven, okay? It's going to have an API endpoint. And so this is really following, I think, in step when we start talking about microservices or container native architectures, right? We're starting to, decouple our architecture to make it loosely coupled, right? And to allow these interchanges to happen so that I can place my application where it makes most sense. And that could be from a price perspective, it could be from a capabilities perspective, it could be from a security perspective. And like we talked about with Edge, right? Maybe I need to make a choice as to where it makes the most sense to put that compute. So what this is all talking about is something that they call Composable Enterprise, okay? And it's really what this is doing, and I won't read through this definition with you, but one of the things I want you to think about when we're starting to talk about how are we going to consume services, what is this next evolutionary step that's going to occur? What we're trying to do is we're trying to allow for the let's say business analysts or the line of business to start to be able to kind of architect the way that these things are woven together, by themselves, right? Every single time we develop an application or there's a change in business need, I'm sorry, let me go ahead and get you guys caught up on this other slide. There it is, Composable Enterprise. Every time that we change an application or there's a change of a business need, we don't want to have to build a complete new application, right? Maybe there's just a way that we need to change the way the flow of it works. Or we know that we already have a service that's sitting out there that performs this exact operation that we need to weave into the mix. Why can't we connect that together when we need to do it, right? And that's the type of business thinking that is coming down the pipe. So reading through this definition here, we talk about what is a composable enterprise. So, and I will read through this definition here. So a composable enterprise is an organization that delivers business outcomes and adapts to the pace of business change. That's the key thing. So instead of having to worry about, okay, I've got to write a brand new application, I've got to go through this whole entire period of weaving everything together, i.e. the monolith, right? And then pushing this back out, making sure that it gets tested, and then considering how can I scale it, and all these other things that maybe go along with that. What we're trying to do is we're trying to take that, if you will, that microservices approach, or just that service-based, architecture approach. And the only thing that we need to worry about really is that endpoint to where that API exists. We can handle all the security and controls that go along with that messaging type of architecture. But at the end of the day, what is making this happen? Okay, there's a lot of other stuff that's sitting there, right? But I'm telling you, the reason why I think this is so critically important is, as it mentions here on this next slide, okay, when we look at what the architectural components are that are in place. So we see in here, we've got business applications, you've got this ecosystem, we've got capabilities, right? Okay, and what they're showing is that there's the API sitting there, and then we have these event channels. But what's supporting all of this? This is that, it says there, that digital business technology platform. And that is RHEL. That's where RHEL's sweet spot is. It is enabling this to be able to happen. And along with the other layers that sit on top of it, right? So we're talking about stuff like Ansible, products like Ansible, platforms like Ansible, and OpenShift. So with that, we're winding up here. We are done with the main part of our presentation this afternoon. I'd like to open it up to see if, number one, if Russ has any other comments that he would like to make, and/or if there was any questions or comments in the Q&A that maybe go back and take a look at it.
Yeah, let me throw in here as well. And this is kind of key. And Mark, if you could actually back up a slide, that would be terrific. The whole notion of the composable architecture, composable enterprise. We have to start first with the goal. And, in this industry, we have a history of trying to solve problems with products. Oh, we need to do this. Get the product that will do this. The whole notion of the true digital transformation, the whole notion of getting to a cloud-enabled world, getting to a composable enterprise, is to start first with the vision of where we want to go. Because so much of what we have done in IT over the years has been trying to patch things to make things a bit better. This is the time when we really have to start with vision. We have to start with the notion that maybe the way we've done it has been okay for what we have, but as we just found out in the past 18 months, when circumstances change mightily, are we really prepared to shift? Because it's not about making things work in a COVID world. It's making things work in the next crisis world, because there's always something. COVID has just been extreme. But to imagine that this is the end point, that once we solve this problem, we're done, frankly, is myopia. So the notion of a composable enterprise, the notion that if we can find a way to be flexible enough to be able to recombine and redo what we need when we need it, to do it quickly, to meet the needs of our organizations efficiently and without having to re-architect everything in the planet. I mean, that's a huge, huge win. And it's not something that we've necessarily done a lot of over the years. But I think what we are now seeing with this sort of concept, that we can take the right set of tools and enable the vision. So that's kind of the thing. It's like, are you going to buy software? More than likely. But you need to be able to have the vision and say, I want to facilitate this vision. How do we get there? And that's part of one of the things that we're actually very proud at Red Hat is that, like I said earlier, the hybrid cloud vision, which really does fit into the composable enterprise model, because once again, you want to be able to not only recombine elements, but you may want to change platforms quickly. Because some of these composable things, you find them inside the public cloud. They've got some wonderful pieces. They say, oh, you can put things together, and you can. But the question remains, what happens if you want to move to a different cloud? What happens if that cloud is too expensive or insecure, or, you name it? Well, if you just tied yourself to that wagon, that's a problem. You want to be able to have the architecture survive all the shifts in the market, which means that a provider goes away, a cloud provider goes away or doesn't become usable. It means that maybe you're going to bring some stuff back on premises. Are you capable of doing that? So the vision has to be there first. And that's something that, our SA organization works with all the time, to try to help the customer base, and our partners as well, try to help the customer base to understand, what's your vision? What would you really like? What would give you the ultimate flexibility? And then from there, we can work backwards and say, okay, so you need to be able to do this. You need to be able to do that. Now, how do we get you there? And that's the process. So that's one of the things that, we really encourage people to consider at this point in time, because we've just been through the mill, right? And as Mark was saying, there were a lot of changes made, and some of them had to be made really quickly. And so that absolutely makes sense, to apply the Band-Aid when the wound is bleeding. But now we need to be able to sit back and say, okay, are we really in the right position, or did we just kind of hold things together for a while? Where do we want to be? Where do we want to go? So this is kind of the focus. How do we get to this composable enterprise? How do we get to a true hybrid cloud situation so we have maximum flexibility, maximum maneuverability as things change? We're there, our organizations are there, and we keep going regardless of what gets thrown at us. Mark, I'm going to go back to you.
That was awesome. Yeah, appreciate you bringing that up. That's one of the main things, that I want to ping on one of the things that you said there. No matter what, you're going to have to hitch your cart to, or to some horse, right? And we've talked about your ability to move. That's our whole reason to be. We want to make sure that you can leverage the best out of any hyperscaler, really any platform. We're absolutely trying to make sure that we can enable, and is our, not necessarily our reason to be, but it's a huge part of our story. And that is, we want you to be able to, lift and shift, or whatever it has to be. If you run into a situation, as Russ was alluding to there, maybe, you need a higher level of security. Maybe you've got to move stuff back on prem. We want that transition for you to be as seamless as possible, so that you can make these types of decisions, because that's what you should be able to do with, again, your applications, that in the topology, the way that architecture looks. If you want to put some of it in Azure, go ahead. You should be able to. And if you need to move it and put it in AWS, that's fine. Or if you've got parts running in both, it just shouldn't matter, and it doesn't. So these are some of the things that we're bringing to bear. Again, we've been talking about Linux, so I think we're trying to focus a little bit on RHEL, but it's RHEL and all the other components that can sit on top of it and really help you out and get you to this point that we're talking about. So Jamie, I don't know if there's any questions in the Q&A. If not, that is it for us this afternoon, unless you're seeing anything.
I do not see anything.
All right. Well, we will give everybody 10 minutes back of their day, which is good, and get ready for your next set of meetings that I'm sure we're all running to. We appreciate your time and spending a little bit of your afternoon with us today.
Thank you for everyone joining today. We hope you found today's Tech Spotlight informative and meaningful. As I mentioned earlier, the Spotlight was recorded and will be available to download on the DLT Marketplace, so you can share with your colleagues or watch again on demand. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for joining.